重要开放门户，学习借鉴国际自由贸易港的成功经验。今天，中国特色自由贸易港研究院、新加坡国立大学东亚研究所、中国海南改革发展研究院、中国南海研究院在海口联合主办海南自由贸易港与东南亚区域合作国际论坛。来自新加坡、马来西亚、菲律宾、印度尼西亚以及中国北京、江苏、广东、陕西、甘肃等19个省市和海南本地共近300多名代表，通过线上线下参加本次论坛。论坛开幕式现在开始，有请中国特色自由贸易港研究院副院长、中国南海研究院院长吴世存博士主持。Now please welcome Dr. Wu Sichun, Vice President of China Institute for Free Trade Ports with Chinese Characteristics and President of National Institute for South China Sea Studies, to chair the opening ceremony.
早上好，女士们、先生们，欢迎大家出席海南自由贸易港与东亚区域合作国际论坛。这应该是2018年4月，中央决定建设海南自由贸易港以来的我们举行的第3次类似的论坛，主要是借助这么一个机制，为海南自由贸易港建设提供智力支撑。今天的上午的论坛应该是一个全天的安排，我们有开幕式，紧接着下面有第一个议题的讨论，下午还有2个分议题的讨论。主要我们是围绕海南自由贸易港如何发挥自身优势，融入和参与东南亚的区域合作，还有如何借鉴新加坡的经验，为海南自由贸易港提供智力支撑。再一个呢，我们还要围绕区域合作和开放的要求，研究探讨新世纪海南自由贸易港建设的有关开放的政策设计和制度的集成创新。上午开幕式我们有3个主旨发言，他们分别是主办方之一，新加坡国立大学东亚研究所所长Hofman博士。第2位呢是新加坡前外交部长，郭氏集团及嘉里物流联网有限公司高级顾问杨荣文先生，还有我们的东道主中国特色自由贸易港研究院的院长中改院的院长池柏林教授。因为石院长大家都非常熟悉了，我想把2位线上的演讲嘉宾简单的给大家介绍一下。Hofman博士是荷兰人，他现任新加坡国立大学东亚研究所所长，新加坡国立大学李光耀公共政策管理学院实践教授。在加入新加坡大学之前呢，Hofman教授曾经在世界银行工作了27年，这27年当中，其中有22年是在亚洲，那么这22年当中又有12年是在中国。同时呢，他2014年到2019年呢，担任世界银行中国代表处的负责人，是中国世界银行的中国首席经济学家。他的研究领域主要涉及财政政策、债务问题，同时还有中国和印尼的经济史。第2位，杨荣文先生呢，2004年到2011年担任新加坡的外交部长。他现在头衔很多，我就简单的念一下，选择一些。现任伯格鲁文研究院、北京大学国际咨询委员会、北京论坛高级顾问委员会、IESE 商学院国际顾问委员会等等的这样一些咨询顾问委员会机制的委员。杨外长应该在线上面。前新加坡驻华大使罗家良先生曾经送过一本杨荣文先生的专著《榕 下的陈诗，放在我的书架上，我时不时的还要拜读一下，有很多他的论述非常精辟，有一些照片，尤其他寻根的一些照片令我印象深刻。同时，我也注意到杨荣文先生在前天，李光耀公共政策论坛上面还有一段对话，我觉得还是很有意义。他认为中国主张多极化，那么中国主张多极化就应该了解世界的想法和意见，甚至他建议，如果中国把丝绸之路能够改成或者说考虑到其他国家的关系，改成丝香丝绸和香料之路，那可能更为国际社会所接受。好了，我不多说了，我想我就请出第一位演讲嘉宾Hofman教授，有请Professor Hofman, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Wu Shih-sun. It's a great pleasure to be back in Hainan, even if only virtually. My first visit to Hainan was 1994, and my first visit was to the China Institute of Reform and Development, one of the great partners of today's event. I'd also like to thank the other partners, the China Institute for Free Trade Force with Chinese Characteristics, and the National Institute for South China Sea Studies for co-organizing this event. And I would like to thank the Bank of Hainan and the Hainan Reform and Development Foundation for sponsoring this event. This is an important event. It's an important event for Hainan, obviously, but it's an important event for Singapore and the rest of the ASEAN countries as well. Times are not easy in the world economy. China is recovering from the COVID-19 crisis, but the rest of the world is not yet. And as a matter of fact, the rest of the world risks going into a major second wave that might delay recovery from a very, very deep recession. If we look at the IMF's forecast for this year, for 2020, back in January, the forecast for the world was 3% growth in gross domestic product. By September, the forecast was minus 5%, a decline of 5%. So 8 percentage point loss in GDP crisis. And if you add up to that the $12 trillion that governments around the world have spent to help the recovery on its way, in total, the economic losses of COVID-19 are really tremendous. In its wake, we've seen many debates on globalization, we've seen many debates on global value chains, on global supply chains, on how they would adjust in the wake of COVID-19. And frankly, COVID-19 has been a catalyst, has reinforced some of the protectionist tendencies that have prevailed around the world. In that context, the reform of the Hainan Free Trade Port is very encouraging. China has just presented its proposals for the 14th five-year plan, and reform and opening up, even though it is no longer the headline item, it is still an important aspect of China's reforms going forward. And Hainan and the Hainan Free Trade Port can play an important role in that. And with it, it can help maintain openness in the world economy that is so important for prosperity around the world. Of course, ASEAN is an important factor in that. And if we look over the past 5 or even 10 years, we see an increasing strengthening of the ties between China and ASEAN, but also a change in the nature of those ties. Whereas before, a lot of ASEAN countries provided inputs into China's production chain, and China was, if you want, the final assembler of many products that then were in turn exported. Increasingly, more of those supply chains are onshore into China, and China is providing more intermediate inputs to many countries in the region. So quite a different nature of trade. In addition, China has become an important source of investments in ASEAN, both in infrastructure, and the Belt and Road, of course, is known to everybody, but also increasingly in industrial production, creating jobs and creating prosperity for ASEAN, and then especially for countries such as Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, will be a continued trend. In that context, as I said, Hainan Free Trade Port is an important reform, and we here in Singapore are quite excited about the prospects that the reforms might bring for ASEAN and particularly for Singapore. For Singapore, because we see complementarities between the two sides. Singapore started its life, if you want, as a free trade port, and therefore has a lot of experience and history to bring to the table. And we've had exchanges on this theme as well. Second, it is with its logistics capacity, it is a real gateway to the rest of ASEAN. With due apologies to my other colleagues in ASEAN, the Singapore harbour is a phenomenally efficient and impressive undertaking that supplies a lot of the rest of ASEAN, and will continue to do so in my view. And third, there is complementarities in terms of human capital, in terms of expertise in financial services, in logistics, in insurance, and otherwise, and some of which Hainan is quite interested in learning from. Today, we want to encourage that exchange. We want to exchange views on how Hainan can learn from the rest of ASEAN and what the experience is, but also we like to convey the expectations that if you want ASEAN countries have with regard to the Hainan Free Trade Port. And those expectations are, as I said, they are hopeful, but it's going to be a challenge for Hainan to realize its dreams of creating a Hainan Free Trade Port. There is clear competition inside and outside China, and during the day I would much appreciate hearing about how the Hainan Free Trade Port efforts complements or competes with the efforts in Shenzhen that have been recently announced, and or how it fits into the Greater Bay Area development, which is an important point of focus for many ASEAN countries. I'd also like to learn from the delegates from Hainan on what their specific reform program is and how they see their comparative advantage progress in the coming years, and how the ASEAN countries can link up with that development and bring the best out for both sides. With that, I wish the conference every success. I hope to sit in quite a bit of the proceedings as much as I can. I look forward to the keynote speeches of my great friend Fu Lin, whom I've met since 1994, and I'm very grateful to former Minister George Yeo to honor us with his presence and to provide a keynote speech as well. 谢谢大家。
好，谢谢Hofman教授的精彩演讲。在刚才时间不长的演讲里面，给我印象深刻的有这么几点。他认为海南自由贸易港的建设，展示了中国推动经济全球化的决心和信心。那么东南亚与中国在价值链、供应链上的互补关系，同时中国也是东南亚重要的投资来源地。另外呢，他还讲到了新加坡对海南建设自由贸易港的一些启示，尤其是在一些经济合作领域，在物流、人力资本、资本市场等里面还是有互助合作的领域的。另外海南对东盟的期待等等。再次感谢Hofman所长。下面我们有请郎荣文先生演讲，有请 Mr. George Yeo。Thank you.
I thank Professor Wu Sichun Hofman for inviting me to this conference, and I'm delighted to participate in it. Haikou is closer to Singapore than Hanoi, than Manila, and Naypyidaw. In many ways, Hainan is part of Southeast Asia. The climate is similar, it's tropical, affected by the monsoon winds, and has a very maritime atmosphere to it. In fact, it is so similar that when the Japanese Imperial Army planned for the invasion of British Malaya in Singapore, the soldiers trained on Hainan Island. In fact, the army headquarters, I think it was the 25th Army headquarters, was in Hainan. And they took advantage of the vegetation of Hainan, the rubber plantations, to practice moving using bicycles and employing small little tanks which could go in between the trees. For indeed, when they arrived on the peninsula of Malaya, the geography, the climate were very similar. This is how much Hainan is part of Southeast Asia. And if you look at it from the human dimension, all over Southeast Asia, in every country of ASEAN, there are descendants of Hainanese people, some of whom have become prime ministers, have become ministers, and many are now professors, businessmen, community leaders. And in Singapore, Hainanese culture is very closely associated with the food and beverage industry. From the cocktail Singapore sling, all the way to the internationally famous Singapore Hainan chicken rice, the Hainanese people in Singapore are associated with restaurants, with the food industry, and with other industries as well. So therefore, the idea of linking Hainan to Southeast Asia is natural and organic. And the establishment of Hainan since 2018 as a free trade port gives us plenty of opportunities to bring this about. I would like to propose a conceptual idea of working towards a free trade agreement between Hainan Island, Hainan province, and Southeast Asia. Because Hainan is effectively becoming a separate customs area in China. Of course, we will do this in a practical way. It's done step by step, so that all sides are comfortable. And if some countries in ASEAN are uncomfortable, perhaps Hainan can begin with Singapore first, and then from there gradually include other members of ASEAN. And it can cover many areas. It can cover goods and services. It can cover investments. An obvious area is tourism. And one can easily envisage an ASEAN cruise circuit, which includes Hainan as a free trade port. Of course, we must simplify immigration procedures, COVID precautions, and so on. But it's something entirely doable. In fisheries, we should work on Hainan being the place for fishing boats to land their catches for the enormous Chinese market. Then for agricultural products, for example, in China, coconut milk is a very popular drink. It's considered to be healthy. It's not a piece of milk, which many Chinese find difficult to digest. And I heard for some years now that Hainan doesn't produce enough coconuts. Well, you can import coconuts from other parts of Southeast Asia, process them in Hainan, and export them to Hainan to the rest of China. And you can think of many food products basic products to advanced products, we should progressively work towards greater cooperation between Hainan and Southeast Asia through the conceptual framework of a free trade agreement. All this is possible, limited only by our imagination, if the politics allow it. Right now, the politics make it difficult, and I'm talking principally about the South China Sea. It is the single most, and perhaps the only important problem now, preventing further cooperation between China and Southeast Asia in the South China Sea. It's good that the countries are working together on a code of conduct. And once there's a code of conduct, it will become much easier for us to work cooperatively with South China Sea in the area of fisheries and in the exploitation of oil and gas, in facilitating cruises, and most importantly, in removing a reason for others to interfere in the South China Sea. For this, of course, it is important that all the claimant states put aside their legal claims. No one can give up a legal claim because these are from history, from international law, and no country can unilaterally say, I give it up. Of course, if bilaterally countries are prepared to negotiate and say, okay, let's settle 50-50, that is fine. But we must not expect any country to give up its claim unilaterally. And once we're able to do that, once we have a code of conduct in place and begin to work cooperatively, then year by year, the South China Sea will again be what it has been in history, as a sea connecting China to the Nanyang, to Southeast Asia. And this goes back hundreds of years. The great Tang Dynasty monk Yi Jing went to India. He spent many years in Nalanda University. Xuan Zhang went overland from Xi'an, from Chang'an to India. Yi Jing, a man from Shandong, he went to India via Guangzhou. From Guangzhou, he took a Persian boat, spent many years studying Sanskrit and Bahasa, and from there he went to India. He spent many years in India. Then he came back from India to Southeast Asia to translate the sutras and to write two important books. One is called the Nanhai Jigui Neifa Zhuan. The other was Da Tang Si Yi Qiu Jing Gao Shen Zhuan. Two important books in history. As he was translating the sutras, he ran out of paper and ink. So he decided to get onto a boat, probably near Palembang in Sumatra, to tell the boat captain to go to Guangzhou to get him paper and ink. While he was on board, the monsoons suddenly blew, and the captain told him, look, sorry, you cannot go down now, you have to follow us to Guangzhou, because once the wind blows, we have to sail. So he went to Guangzhou. He bought his paper and ink. Then, when the monsoons turned, he went back to Sumatra, where he spent a few more years to complete his work. Then finally, through Guangzhou, he died in Chang'an. Now, this story of toing and froing across the South China Sea can be multiplied 1,000,000 times. And this is how important the South China Sea is in connecting China to the Nanyang, to Southeast Asia, and to the Xiyang, to the Indian Ocean. And if we are able to make full use of the free port status of Hainan, create a free trade agreement, Hainan can play a very important role in re-establishing much deeper links between China and Southeast Asia and create a mutually beneficial future. At the current ASEAN meeting with China, which is at the summit level, yesterday Premier Li Keqiang said that the bilateral trade between China and ASEAN has already overtaken the bilateral trade between China and Europe. If we project further, the bilateral trade between China and ASEAN will greatly exceed the bilateral trade between China and many other countries. It is a bright future, and today's conference is an important step in that direction. Thank you.
谢谢杨荣先生的精彩演讲，非常好，他提到了海南应该是东南亚的一部分，这是一个新的观点。海南人的后裔遍布东南亚，海南的文化、海南的饮食，对东南亚的影响，也是非常深刻的。这是对我来说是一个非常新的观点。另外，他也讲到了海南和东南亚的合作，尤其是海南和新加坡未来的合作。有很多领域，食品领域、这个饮食、这个饮料，包括甚至于 IT 产业领域都是可以进行合作的。另外他还提到了南海，我可以告诉大家的，刚才也提到了，昨天李克强总理参加中国东盟领导人峰会，专门提到了南海。刚才杨荣文先生提到的南海行为准则 COC 的磋商，中国已经向东盟国家提出建议，邀请今年年底之前在北京举行新一轮的南海行为准则磋商的工作组会议和高官会议，争取今年年底完成第2轮审读。如果今年能完成第2轮审读，明年进行第3轮审读，那就为明年年底之前完成 COC 磋商，那么就有可能了。所以我想 COC 是大家的一个共同关切，这样呢就有可能南海的规则建立起来，把南海建设成和平之海、友谊之海、合作之海，所以也为海南未来在和东南亚的进一步的合作当中，能够奠定一个良好的基础。所以他还回顾了中国和东南亚的合作，追溯到很久远的历史，甚至唐朝之前的一段历史。所以他的一句话让我印象非常深刻，就是说中国和东南亚的合作，尤其是海南和东南亚的合作，任何事都是可以做到的，只要我们敢于想象。用中国的话讲，没有做不到的，只有不敢想。这一次谢谢